Hello, my name is Ken, and I've been a Civil War buff for many decades. So I decided to have some fun and put together a 20-question quiz about the American Civil War. And to make the answers to each question just a little bit more interesting and fun, I have sprinkled in a few extra comments and some trivia. So if you're one of those college professors who wear those Benjamin Franklin style glasses, or if you're a high school teacher or history student, or just a Civil War buff like myself, then I think you will really enjoy my 20-question quiz about the American Civil War. Now you can keep track of your own right and wrong answers, but each question is worth 5 points. And with all that said, then let me now get started. And good luck to you. Question 1. Where did the abolitionist John Brown raid a United States arsenal on October the 16th of 1859? Was it A, Washington, D.C., or was it B, Harper's Ferry, Virginia, or was it C, Charleston, South Carolina, or was it D, Savannah, Georgia? The answer is B, Harper's Ferry, Virginia. John Brown's raid was a total failure, and he was hanged 2 months later in December of 1859. Most historians agree that John Brown did not start the Civil War, but he did play a small part in getting the Civil War started. 4 years later, after John Brown's raid, Harper's Ferry, Virginia became Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, after that part of the state broke away from Virginia and became a state of its own, and West Virginia joined the Union in 1863. And then after that, many Confederates started referring to those folks as hillbilly Yankees. Question 2. Which state was the first state to leave the United States that put Southern states' secession in motion? Was it A, South Carolina? Was it B, Mississippi? Was it C, Florida? Or was it D, Alabama? The correct answer is A, South Carolina. South Carolina was the first state to leave the United States on December the 20th of 1860. And soon afterwards, South Carolina was followed by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, North Carolina, Virginia, and the last state to leave the Union was Tennessee. All total, there were 11 Southern states that formed the Confederate States of America. And even though Missouri and Kentucky never did officially withdraw from the United States, they were both considered to be Confederate states by the Confederacy. First Missouri in November of 1861, and then Kentucky in December of 1861. And that's why there are 13 stars on the Confederate Naval Jack flag, what some people call the Stars and Bars. And the star that's in the very center of that Confederate flag supposedly represents the state of Kentucky. Question 3. Abraham Lincoln was the President of the United States throughout the entire Civil War. But who was the Confederate president throughout the entire Civil War? Was it A, James Buchanan? Or was it B, Andrew Johnson? Or was it C, Jefferson Davis? Or was it D, Robert E. Lee? The answer is C, Jefferson Davis from Mississippi. Jefferson Davis swore in as the President of the Confederate States of America in Montgomery, Alabama, the Confederacy's first capital, on February the 18th, 1861. But 3 months later, on May the 20th, the Confederacy decided to move their capital to Richmond, Virginia, where the Confederate capital and the Confederate President, Jefferson Davis, remained throughout the rest of the Civil War. Question 4. When and where did the American Civil War begin? Was it A, April the 15th, 1861 in Washington, D.C., or was it B, September the 17th, 1862 in Sharpsburg, Maryland, or was it C, July the 1st, 1863 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, or was it D, April the 12th, 1861 at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina? The answer is D. On April the 12th of 1861 at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, the American Civil War officially began when the Confederates opened fire with cannons on the United States Fort Sumter that was located on a small island in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. And after almost 34 hours of continuous cannon fire, the United States surrendered Fort Sumter to the Confederates. Question 5. How many states were in the United States when the Civil War started in April of 1861? Was it A, 13 states? Or was it B, 23 states? Or was it C, 34 states? Or was it D, 48 states? The answer is C, 34 states. At the beginning of the Civil War, the United States consisted of 34 states, and that included the 11 Southern Confederate states. By the end of the Civil War in 1865, the United States consisted of 36 states because West Virginia joined the United States in 1863 and Nevada joined the United States in 1864. Question 6. Including slaves and indentured servants, what was the population of the 34 states, including the 8 U.S. territories, when the Civil War began in April 1861? Was it A, 18 million? Or was it B, 23 million? Or was it C, 32 million? Or was it D, 38 million? The answer is C, 32 million people. And of those 32 million people, approximately 4 million were slaves and indentured servants. An indentured servant was a person who worked for somebody in order to pay off a debt to that same person who the indentured servant was working for, which made it a kind of a slavery itself. The population of the United States today is approximately 342 million people. Question 7. What was the color of the Confederate soldiers' uniform? Was it A, blue? Or was it B, gray? Or was it C, brown? Or was it D, light green? The answer is B, gray. The Confederate soldiers wore gray uniforms, and the Northern Union soldiers usually referred to the Southern Confederate soldiers as rebels or Johnny Rebs, and those Johnny Rebs were very well known for their very scary rebel yells during battle. And for many years after the Civil War was over, people would often ask one of the old rebel veterans if he could still do the rebel yell. And the old rebel veteran would always say, "Yes, I can, but in order to do it properly, I will first have to go for several weeks without eating any food, because a good rebel yell can only be done with a totally empty stomach." Question 8. What was the color of the Union soldiers' uniform? Was it A, blue? Was it B, dark tan? Was it C, brown? Or was it D, light green? The answer is A, blue. The United States soldier, also known as a Union soldier, wore a blue uniform, and the Confederate soldiers had nicknames for the Union soldiers too. They called them either Yankees, Yanks, Billy Yanks, or Blue Bellies. Question 9. Who were probably the two most popular generals who fought for the North, also known as the Union? Was it A, General J.E.B. Stuart and General A.P. Hill? Or was it B, General Ulysses S. Grant and General William Tecumseh Sherman? Or was it C, General George McClellan and General Winfield Scott? Or was it D, General Robert E. Lee and General Stonewall Jackson? The answer is B, General Ulysses S. Grant and General William Tecumseh Sherman. General Grant was well known to be a very effective military commander of the Union Army, and after the Civil War, General Grant went on to be our 18th President of the United States. General William Tecumseh Sherman was probably best known for his famous March to the Sea, when he took his Union Army and carved a 250-mile long by 50-mile wide swath from Atlanta, Georgia, all the way to Savannah, Georgia, where he arrived in Savannah in December of 1864. And on that march to the sea, General Sherman's soldiers, who were called Sherman's bummers, burned and destroyed everything that was in its path. And it's because of Sherman's bummers is why that term is still with us today. They're all a bunch of bums. Question 10. Who were probably the two most popular generals who fought for the South, also known as the Confederacy? Was it A, General Jeb Stuart and General A.P. Hill? Or was it B, General Braxton Bragg and General George Pickett? Or was it C, General George McClellan and General Winfield Scott? Or was it D, General Robert E. Lee and General Stonewall Jackson? The answer is D, General Robert E. Lee and General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Lieutenant Robert E. Lee graduated from West Point in 1829, and he graduated second in his class with no demerits. And at the beginning of the Civil War, General Robert E. Lee was already in his 50s, and he is probably best known for being the most brilliant military commander during the American Civil War, and that includes both North and South. And after the Civil War, General Robert E. Lee is well known for his hard work at trying to restore peace and reunite the United States. General Thomas Stonewall Jackson was very well known for being deeply religious, and he was well known for being absolutely fearless during a battle. And in fact, that's how he got his nickname, Stonewall. Question 11. Where was the first major Civil War land battle fought? Was it A, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? Or was it B, Manassas, Virginia? Or was it C, Antietam, Maryland? Or was it D, Pea Ridge, Arkansas? The answer is B, Manassas, Virginia. 3 months after the Civil War officially began at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, the Union Army and the Confederate Army met for the first time on a battlefield located near Manassas, Virginia, on July the 21st of 1861. The Johnny Reb Confederates in their gray uniforms numbered about 29,000 soldiers, and the Union Army in their blue uniforms numbered about 35,000 soldiers. The Confederates called it the Battle of Manassas, but the Union called it the Battle of Bull Run. The battlefield was located only about 30 miles from Washington, D.C., so there were many citizens and politicians who came out to watch the battle, and some even brought their blankets and picnic baskets, because at the time, many people believed that the Civil War would only last just a few minutes, and one politician even said that there would be such little bloodshed that he would be able to clean it all up with his handkerchief. But when the battle began and the citizens started witnessing the horrible carnage, then total chaos ensued. And the citizens and politicians all started running and screaming for their lives all the way back to Washington, D.C. By the end of the battle, there was a total of 868 soldiers who were killed. And there was a total of 2,593 soldiers who were seriously wounded. So not counting those who were missing in action or who had deserted, there was 3,461 total casualties. The Johnny Rebs had routed the Union Army, and the battle was a total Confederate victory. Oh, and by the way, it was during the heat of that battle when the Confederate General Thomas Jackson earned his famous nickname when one of the other Confederate officers made a statement. "Look, there stands General Jackson over there like a stone wall." And forevermore after that, he was always known as General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Question 12. What was the name of General Robert E. Lee's horse? Was it A, Cincinnati? Or was it B, Duke? Or was it C, Traveler? Or was it D, Little Sorrel? The answer is C, Traveler. Back in the 1800s, a horse was the main mode of transportation, and Civil War historians claim that General Robert E. Lee and his horse Traveler were practically inseparable. And in fact, today, General Robert E. Lee is buried in Lexington, Virginia, and his horse Traveler is buried close to him. Cincinnati was General Grant's horse, and Duke was General Sherman's horse, and Little Sorrel was General Jackson's horse. Back during the Civil War, a teamer or a teamster was a person who was skilled at driving a team of horses or mules, pulling a wagon. And the mule skinner was a person who was skilled at training mules for pulling a wagon. And a farrier was a person who was skilled at cleaning, trimming, and taking care of the hooves of horses and mules. Question 13. What were the names of the two ironclad warships that fought on March the 8th and 9th of 1862 near Hampton Roads, Virginia? Was it A, the Union ship USS Monitor and the Confederate ship CSS Virginia? Or was it B, the Union ship USS Cairo and the Confederate ship CSS Raleigh? Or was it C, the Union's USS Alligator and the Confederates CSS Arkansas? Or was it D, the Confederates CSS Hunley and the Union ship USS Housatonic? The answer is A, the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia. Early in the Civil War, the Confederates had captured the United States USS Merrimac. And after they installed iron plating and turned it into an ironclad ship, the Confederates then renamed the USS Merrimac to the CSS Virginia. And when the Virginia and the Monitor met, they fired at each other with heavy cannon fire for many hours and at very close range, but neither ship was able to penetrate the other's armored plating, so they finally just called it quits. And even though it was a stalemate, both sides went on to claim a victory. Later on during the Civil War, the Confederates built a small submarine that they called the CSS H.L. Hunley. And the small Confederate submarine, the Hunley, used an 8-man crew who would manually turn a propeller shaft by using a series of pedals and cranks for forward propulsion. And on February the 17th of 1864, the CSS Hunley successfully attacked and sank the United States USS Housatonic in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. And it became the first submarine in history to successfully attack and sink an enemy ship, which changed naval warfare forever. Question 14. Which battle was the bloodiest single-day battle of the Civil War and was fought on September the 17th, 1862? Was it A, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? Or was it B, Antietam, Maryland? Or was it C, Chickamauga, Georgia? Or was it D, Shiloh, Tennessee? The answer is B, Antietam, Maryland. Also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg, Maryland by the Confederates, that one single-day battle within a 24-hour period produced 23,000 casualties, and included in that number approximately 3,600 soldiers were killed. And during that one-day battle, there were 3 Confederate generals and there were 3 Union generals who were killed. At the end of the one-day battle, and after 23,000 casualties, the battle was a Union victory. The casualty count and the carnage of the battle was horrendous. And since there was a very short supply of chloroform and ether that was used for an anesthetic, the surgeon would give the wounded soldier a lead bullet to bite down on, as the soldier would be fully awake while the surgeon performed an amputation by using a handsaw. And that old saying is still with us today. you're just going to have to bite the bullet. And even after all these many years, doctors still carry that same nickname, Dr. Sawbones. A self-taught nurse named Clara Barton came to Antietam, and she assisted the doctors and the surgeons, and she attended to the wounded and the dying. And Clara Barton also attended many other battles during the Civil War. And 16 years after the Civil War was over, Clara Barton went on and founded the American Red Cross in 1881. Question 15. Which battle was the biggest battle of the Civil War? It was fought on July the 1st through the 3rd, 1863. Was it A, Chickamauga, Georgia? Or was it B, Chancellorsville, Virginia? Or was it C, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? Or was it D, Shiloh, Tennessee? The answer is C, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There were approximately 165,000 soldiers who fought the 3-day battle that produced approximately 51,000 casualties. And from that number of casualties, approximately 7,000 soldiers were killed. At the end of the battle, it was a Union victory. Many historians refer to the Battle of Gettysburg as the granddaddy of all Civil War battles and the turning point of the Civil War that would ultimately result in a Union victory. 4 months after the battle was over, President Abraham Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and on November the 19th of 1863, he delivered his famous Gettysburg Address speech, which would later be recognized as probably the most famous speech in all of American history. Question 16. Which battle was the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War and was fought on September the 18th through the 20th, 1863? Was it A, Chickamauga, Georgia? Or was it B, Chancellorsville, Virginia? Or was it C, Fredericksburg, Virginia? Or was it D, Parker's Crossroads, Tennessee? The answer is A, Chickamauga, Georgia. The 3-day battle at Chickamauga, Georgia was the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War, and it took place only 2.5 months after the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There were 120,000 Union and Confederate soldiers who met at the Battle of Chickamauga, Georgia. And at the end of the 3-day battle, there was approximately 35,000 total casualties. And out of that number, there was approximately 4,000 soldiers who were killed. The Union commander was General William Rosecrans, whose nickname was Old Rosie. And the Confederate commander was General Braxton Bragg. The Battle of Chickamauga, Georgia was a Confederate victory. Question 17. Who were the two best well-known photographers during the American Civil War in the 1860s? Was it A, George Eastman and Ansel Adams? Or was it B, Walter Evans and Arthur Rothstein? Or was it C, George Bernard and Timothy O'Sullivan? Or was it D, Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner? The answer is D, Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner. There were many Civil War photographers, but Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner were the two best known Civil War photographers. There were many thousands of photographs that were taken during the Civil War, but the most popular were the portrait photographs that were taken of the individual soldiers. And those photographs were called tintypes. And a tintype was an inexpensive type of photograph, whereas the image was put onto a thin sheet of metal. Civil War photographers usually did not get to the battlefields until several days after the battle was over. And the photographers always said that they could smell the stench in the air from up to 5 miles away before arriving at the battlefield, where hundreds of dead soldiers, dead horses, and dead mules still laid on the ground where they had fallen. Question 18. Where and when did the American Civil War officially end? Was it A, Washington, D.C. on April the 15th, 1865? Or was it B, Richmond, Virginia on April the 14th, 1865? Or was it C, Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia on April the 9th, 1865? Or was it D, Charleston, South Carolina on April the 12th, 1865? The answer is C, Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia on April the 9th, 1865. The Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate Army to the Union General Ulysses S. Grant. And then on orders from General Grant, the Union Army shared their food rations with the starving Confederate Army, who had no food and who had not eaten in several days. 1 month later, on May the 10th of 1865, the Union Army captured the Confederate President, Jefferson Davis, at Irwinville, Georgia. And soon after that, all 36 states started coming back together again as one nation, the United States of America. Question 19. How many soldiers died during the 4-year Civil War? Was it A, 350,000 total deaths? Or was it B, 450,000 total deaths? Or was it C, 550,000 total deaths? Or was it D, 650,000 total deaths? The answer is D, 650,000 total deaths. But nobody really knows the actual number because of a lack of good record keeping during the American Civil War. So that 650,000 number is just a good guesstimate by Civil War historians. And the Civil War historians also claim that about 1/2 of those soldiers who died did not die from bullets on the battlefield, because those soldiers actually died from many different kinds of diseases and malnutrition. Historians also claim there was probably at least another 650,000 soldiers who were seriously wounded, but went on and lived and survived the Civil War. So when you add it all together, that brings the total casualty count to a total of somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million soldiers who had either died or who had been seriously wounded during the American Civil War. Question 20. Where and when did President Abraham Lincoln die? Was it A, April the 9th, 1865 at the White House in Washington, D.C.? Or was it B, April the 14th, 1865 at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C.? Or was it C, April the 15th, 1865, at the Peterson House in Washington, D.C.? Or was it D, April the 12th, 1865, at the Capitol Building in Washington, D.C.? The answer is C, April the 15th, 1865, at the Peterson House in Washington, D.C. 5 days after the Civil War had officially ended, and on April the 14th of 1865, President Abraham Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, went to the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. to attend a play that was called My American Cousin. And it was during that play when an actor who worked at that theater named John Wilkes Booth shot President Lincoln in the head with a Derringer pistol. President Lincoln did not die immediately, but he was totally unconscious. And a doctor and several others moved President Lincoln from the Ford's Theater across the street to a boarding house called the Peterson House, where he could better be attended to by medical people. But the next morning, on April the 15th, and at 7:22 a.m., President Abraham Lincoln took his last breath and died. The Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who was with President Lincoln when he passed away, said these immortal words, "Now he belongs to the ages." And thank you so much for taking my 20-question American Civil War quiz test. I hope you passed it, I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did like it, then please click on that thumbs up button or send me a comment. Thank you again, and goodbye.